And away we go, episode 1245 of the Al Galdi podcast. It is Friday, January 23rd, 2026. It is the day before Snowmageddon 2026 in the Washington, D.C. area, we think. At least this is what we're being told, right? Snow is expected to move in on Saturday night and continue through Sunday. Potentially double-digit inches of snow. But, of course, potentially not double-digit inches of snow. Potentially just a few inches of snow. We know how this kind of thing can be, right? Overhyped and overblown. Wherever you are, we hope that you are safe. We hope that you are warm. And we hope that you enjoy the NFL's Conference Championship Sunday. The New England Patriots at the Denver Broncos in the AFC Championship game this Sunday afternoon at 3. The Los Angeles Rams at the Seattle Seahawks in the NFC Championship game this Sunday evening at 6:30. A Conference Championship Sunday in which each game features a head coaching battle of Mike versus Sean. Are you aware of that? Mike Vrabel's Patriots at Sean Payton's Broncos and Sean McVay's Rams at Mike McDonald's Seahawks. Two conference championship games, each of which features a head coaching matchup of Mike versus Sean. Hello and welcome to this Friday installment of the Al Galdi podcast. Next segment, an all-22 style deep dive on the Washington Commanders defensive coordinator candidates, as we'll speak with a good friend of this podcast, Commanders analyst Mark Bullock of Bullock's Film Room, which you can find at markbullock.substack.com. High-level X's and O style insight on the many candidates reportedly in the mix for the Commanders defensive coordinator job, including Seattle Seahawks defensive passing game coordinator and defensive backs coach Karl Scott, fired Arizona Cardinals head coach and former Philadelphia Eagles defensive coordinator Jonathan Gannon, and Chicago Bears defensive backs coach and defensive passing game coordinator Al Harris. Who should we most want? Who are we most likely to get? What matters most in deciding who to hire? Mark Bullock, next segment. And also on the show, I'll discuss the Washington Nationals and Washington Wizards. The Nats have done it. They have traded starting pitcher MacKenzie Gore. They on Thursday evening announced having traded Gore to the Texas Rangers for 5 prospects. My analysis of the trade is coming up, and I'll react to not just an 8th consecutive loss for our rebuilding and tanking Wizards, a 107-97 loss to the Denver Nuggets at Capital One Arena on Thursday night, but also notable comments from Monumental Basketball president Michael Winger on the state of the Wizards. You can hit me up on X at Al Galdi. You can email me the Al Galdi podcast at yahoo.com. Email from Mike on this podcast. The subject of Mike's email, episode MCCXXXIII. Writes Mike. Hi, Al. Good move. Not using Roman numerals to number your episodes. I recall that was a consideration in the early days of your podcast. Keep up the great work. Thank you for the email, Mike. I actually don't recall considering using Roman numerals to number the episodes of the podcast. If I brought that up, I perhaps did that as a joke. I am vehemently opposed to using Roman numerals to number things that last for a long time, because Roman numerals, once you get to 40, which is XL, become clunky and awkward. I can't stand that the NFL still uses Roman numerals for Super Bowls. I think that looks bizarre, and nobody can easily figure out which Super Bowl is which by using the Roman numerals. The NFL should number Super Bowls like the UFC numbers its major events. Like this Saturday night is UFC 324, not UFC CCCXXIV. I mean, how ridiculous would that be? This season's Super Bowl is Super Bowl 60, which is Super Bowl LX. And you are listening to episode 1245 of this podcast, episode MCCXLV. Email from Larry Tinsley II on former Commanders players in the NFL playoffs. Writes Larry, hey, Al, not only are Montez Sweat, Olamide Zaccheaus, Emmanuel Forbes Jr., and Cam Curl thriving on their respective teams, but as I watched the games this past weekend, I thought of something. Where were our most pressing needs this season? Yep, you guessed it, pass rush, secondary, and receiver. While I'm happy for the players and their success, it turns my stomach to be reminded of our coaching staffs and front offices' ineptitude of seeing these players' values, which is even more painful when considering our lack of depth at every position besides our offensive line and quarterback if Mariota doesn't leave for greener pastures. On a lighter note, the song Mama Said Knock You Out popped up on my playlist this past weekend. Instead of singing along, I couldn't stop laughing long enough to kick one single verse. Suffice it to say, I will have a new appreciation for this hip-hop classic every time I hear it from now on. Thanks a lot, Al. LOL. As always, thank you for your objective and common-sense approach to following our team so we don't have to. We are beyond fortunate to have you as one of our very own here in the D.C. area. You are truly the best of the best. Blessings to you and your family always. Larry Tinsley II, or LT2, as you called me after my previous message to you some months ago. Well, thank you very much for that email, Larry, a.k.a. LT2. Yes, we on the podcast have been having some scheduled fun with the Commanders on January 10th, having promoted assistant quarterbacks coach David Blau to offensive coordinator. The all-time great song, Mama Said Knock You Out, by LL Cool J. LL Cool J at one point in the song says, Blau, how you like me now? And I said that is what Dan Quinn is saying to his critics of promoting David Blau to offensive coordinator. Blau, how you like me now? Blau, how you like me now? Yeah, Blau, how you like me now? So there's no question that the Commanders this season could have used the ex-Commanders who Larry mentioned, Chicago Bears edge defender Montez Sweat, Chicago Bears receiver Olamide Zaccheaus, Los Angeles Rams safety Cameron Curl, and Los Angeles Rams cornerback Emmanuel Forbes Jr. Now, in fairness to the current Commanders football operations regime, the team traded Montez Sweat before the regime was installed. The Commanders traded Sweat to the Bears on October 31st, 2023, Halloween 2023, what was 2023 NFL trade deadline day. The Commanders hired Adam Peters as general manager in January 2024 and hired Dan Quinn as head coach in February 2024. So I don't put Sweat being gone on Peters and Quinn, but the other three guys, Olamide Zaccheaus, Cam Curl, and Emmanuel Forbes, left the Commanders during this regime of Peters and Quinn. Curl left 2 off seasons ago. He in March 2024 signed as an unrestricted free agent with the Rams. The Commanders on November 30th, 2024 announced having released Forbes, and Zaccheaus this past March signed as an unrestricted free agent with the Bears. The guy out of those three who I most wish the Commanders still had, is Cam Curl. People have overstated how well Emmanuel Forbes and Olamide Zaccheaus did this season, but Curl has had a good season. He, for the 2025 regular season, had an overall grade per Pro Football Focus of 73.1. He and the Rams, a 2017 overtime win at the Bears this past Sunday evening in the divisional round, had the big interception in overtime, prompting Rams head coach and former Redskins offensive coordinator Sean McVay during the Rams' post-game locker room celebration to refer to Curl as, quote, my MFing man, Cam Curl, end quote.
How about my mother man, Cam Curl?
Yeah, there you go. How about my MFing man, Cam Curl? You know, a lot of Commanders fans are wondering that right now, but in a different way. Cam Curl, why'd we let him go? How about my MFing man, Cam Curl? Well, we of course hope that the Commanders with Adam Peters and Dan Quinn ultimately have long-term success. Short-term thinking does not deliver long-term results. Good process does. Science does, especially when it comes to skincare. And the best product for skincare is OneSkin. OneSkin formulas are powered by the OS1 peptide, a patented peptide built on longevity science proven to target aging at the cellular level. OneSkin supports the cellular repair that keeps your skin looking and feeling better as you get older. This is not about adding extra steps to your routine. This is about swapping in smarter ones. Born from over 10 years of longevity research, OneSkin's OS1 peptide is proven to target the cells that cause the visible signs of aging, helping you unlock your healthiest skin now and as you age. And for a limited time, OneSkin is making it even easier to stay consistent with up to 30% off your first 3 subscription orders when you use the promo code GALDI at oneskin.co/GALDI. That's oneskin.co/Galdi and use the promo code Galdi. oneskin.co/Galdi up to 30% off with the promo code Galdi. And after your purchase, you'll be asked where you heard about OneSkin. Please support our show and say that Al Galdi sent you. Hey, if you enjoyed this podcast, check out BGO Blind Pig, the official podcast of BGObsession.com. BGO Blind Pig is great. It is a roundtable discussion of the Washington Commanders. It's like you and a bunch of your buddies who are Commanders fans are hanging out and talking about the team. The conversation is smart and fun and respectful. The latest episode includes a review of the Commanders roster. You can find the BGO Blind Pig podcast on YouTube and on any major podcast provider. Make BGObsession.com the home for your burgundy and gold obsession, and make the BGO Blind Pig podcast part of your Commanders podcast rotation. Will we emerge from this weekend and from the potential blizzard in the Washington, D.C. area this weekend with a new defensive coordinator for the Washington Commanders, or is the search spilling over until at least next work week? The list of those who the Commanders reportedly have interviewed or were to interview for their defensive coordinator vacancy: Las Vegas Raiders defensive coordinator Patrick Graham, Kansas City Chiefs defensive line coach Joe Cullen, Tennessee Titans defensive coordinator Denard Wilson, Seattle Seahawks defensive passing game coordinator and defensive backs coach Karl Scott, Minnesota Vikings defensive coordinator Brian Flores, though he's no longer a candidate, of the Vikings on Wednesday evening announcing having signed Flores to a contract extension, fired Arizona Cardinals head coach and former Philadelphia Eagles defensive coordinator Jonathan Gannon, and Chicago Bears defensive backs coach and defensive passing game coordinator Al Harris. And still lurking is fired Atlanta Falcons head coach and former Falcons and Los Angeles Rams defensive coordinator Raheem Morris. He is anticipated as a candidate for the Commanders defensive coordinator job if he does not get another head coaching job. It is a pleasure to welcome back to the Al Galdi podcast Commanders analyst Mark Bullock. Mark is exceptional at talking Commanders from an X's and O's standpoint. He does tremendous Commanders all 22 breakdowns. You can read his work on his Substack, Bullock's Film Room, which you can find at markbullock.substack.com. And he, on his Substack on Wednesday morning, put up a piece analyzing the Commanders defensive coordinator candidates. Headline, quote, "Pros and cons to each Commanders defensive coordinator candidate," end quote. Mark is written for The Athletic and for The Washington Post. He also is a Commanders fan. You can follow Mark on X at Mark Bullock NFL. Hey, Mark, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well, thanks. How about you?
Doing well. Nice to talk to you. Now that Brian Flores is out, who do you like best out of the remaining Commanders defensive coordinator candidates?
So I think there are some pros and cons to kind of each guy that's out there, and I think you could probably justify any of the guys that they've talked to. I think the one that would probably be the most exciting at this point would be Karl Scott, the Seahawks DB's coach and pass game coordinator. He's been under a lot of good coaches. He worked under Nick Saban at Alabama for a few years. He worked under Mike Zimmer at Minnesota. Obviously, he worked under Pete Carroll at Seattle, and then was retained by Mike Macdonald where he is now. And that Macdonald's system is going to probably spread around the NFL pretty quickly, given how much success he's having right now on the defensive side of the ball. So I think everyone's going to be wanting to get in on the ground floor of trying to find those McDonald's coaches. So, a young guy like Karl Scott would be an interesting one. And I think if you couldn't get the kind of the big fish in Brian Flores, which obviously isn't happening now, maybe you go with, we've got a younger guy on the offensive side of the ball. Well, let's have a complete youth movement, get a younger, inexperienced guy on the defensive side of the ball. And we're saying we're kind of resetting and hopefully, go with some younger players in free agency in the draft and stuff and really start to build this thing up, rather than the kind of older short-term deals that they have been doing. I think Commanders fans would probably get behind that move a little bit more than, a guy that's a little bit more experienced. So that would probably be the more exciting one, but that obviously would come with a lot of risk attached to it for Dan Quinn in particular. So I'm not sure if that's the way they will go, but that's the way I'd be leaning personally.
neither Karl Scott nor Al Harris has called defensive plays in the NFL. Now, personally, I don't think whether the Commanders' defensive coordinator hire has previously called defensive plays in the NFL is that big of a deal, so long as the guy makes for a good defensive coordinator. Like, if you're good, and you can figure out defensive play calling quickly. But how important to you is that the Commanders' defensive coordinator hire be someone who previously has called defensive plays in the NFL?
I think given that Dan Quinn is a defensive-minded head coach, I think if you were going to go with an inexperienced guy that hasn't called plays before, I feel like it makes more sense to do the defensive coordinator on that side, because you have Dan Quinn as the head coach to kind of oversee things and guide them. And Dan Quinn, it didn't work out with Joe Witt, but he let Witt run the defense and call the defense, and then provided guidance when needed, and obviously stepped in and took over when it wasn't going well. But he gave him a long runway, and he let him run the defense. So he gave Witt every chance, and that would be, I think, somewhat appealing for a young defensive-minded coach, is that you'd have a defensive-minded head coach that was going to let you run your system, is going to be there to help guide you if you need it, but will give you your space to run the defense and not interfere, and just be a good mentor. So I would think that makes sense on the defensive side of the ball, but the question then becomes, we're entering year 3 with Dan Quinn, and they've already gone inexperienced on the offensive side of the ball with David Blau. Do they want to do that on both sides of the ball? Well, coming into this offseason, given that it's the critical year 3 and they've just had a bad season, and Dan Quinn could be on the hot seat, or possibly should be on the hot seat, then I would have thought that they would have gone conservative and gone with the experienced on both sides of the ball. But the fact that they've already gone inexperienced on one side, maybe they are feeling this is the time to actually reset and build things up, as I said, from the ground up, and go with young guys on both sides of the ball, and really start a youth movement, both with the coaching staff and with the players, and really try to build a foundation that can springboard the franchise forward for the next few years.
A big topic with the Commanders' defensive coordinator search has been, will the hire be someone with whom Commanders head coach Dan Quinn has previously worked? Now, the majority of the reported candidates are people with whom Quinn has not previously worked, but he has previously worked with Al Harris. So Quinn was the Dallas Cowboys defensive coordinator for the 2021 through 2023 seasons. Harris was the Cowboys defensive backs coach for the 2020 through 2023 seasons, and then was the Cowboys assistant head coach and defensive backs coach for the 2024 season. What stands out to you about Al Harris?
Yeah, well, first, the whole, is it someone Dan Quinn has worked with before? Dan Quinn's worked with half the league at this point. It's hard to not find guys that have a connection either directly or indirectly to Dan Quinn. And people get annoyed with it, and I understand, with the Rivera era, where Rivera brought in all of his own guys from Carolina straight away, he just basically transported the Carolina franchise to Washington. I understand that was a bad move, but Dan Quinn has brought in guys that he's connected with, but he's also brought in guys that he had, Cliff Kingsbury was a guy he wasn't connected with. David Blau was not a guy he's not connected with. There's Jason Simmons was a guy he wasn't connected with. He was indirectly via Joe Witt, but that was not a direct connection to Dan Quinn. So it's not like he's just been hiring all of his friends and transferring the Falcons organization from the 2015 to now. So that is a little bugbear for me. One of the big appeals about hiring Dan Quinn in the first place was he had so many connections around the league. He was going to be able to build a good staff because of those connections. And now we're saying we don't want him to use those connections to build a staff. It doesn't make sense. Anyway, that was a sub point. Al Harris. Yeah, I think the thing that stands out with Harris and the defenses that he's been a part of is turnovers. And turnovers are, by nature, a very fluctuating stat. For year to year, it tends to be, 1 year you could be really high in turnovers, the next year you could be really low. It does tend to be quite a luck-driven statistic. But guys like Al Harris seem to be able to generate constant turnovers year after year after year, regardless of where they are. And we saw this when he worked with Dan Quinn and Joe Witt in Dallas. We saw this, obviously, this year with the Bears, where they went from sort of, I think they had 11 interceptions or something last year, and they had 23 this year. And so clearly there's some sort of knack for turnovers and creating turnovers and interceptions, particularly that Al Harris has as a coach, and there's something that he's doing that's helping that. It's hard to put your finger on exactly what it is. I spent the morning watching all of the 23 interceptions, and some of them, a lot of them were against bad quarterbacks. Like 7 of them were against good quarterbacks. So he had 2 against Dak Prescott, 1 against Jaden Daniels, 1 against Brock Purdy, 1 against Jared Goff, and 1 against Jordan Love and Jalen Hurts. So those would be the good quarterbacks that he had interceptions against. But Jaden Daniels' interception, if you remember, against the Bears, there was that seam ball to Deebo Samuel that should have really been a touchdown with a better throw, but he underthrew it and kind of threw it a little bit behind Deebo, and the safety was able to undercut it. Jared Goff's interception was a gift where he threw it into triple coverage essentially, and Jordan Love's interception was one where he just threw it straight to a linebacker. So there was a couple of gifts in that. And then you look at the rest of the 16 interceptions. So those were 7 interceptions against good quarterbacks, and 3 of them were gifts. A couple of them were lucky bounces and what have you. You look at the rest of the 16 interceptions. You had 3 against J.J. McCarthy, 3 against Spencer Rattler, 3 against Shedeur Sanders. So you had a lot of interceptions against bad quarterbacks where they're really taking advantage of those guys. So I guess the good part of Al Harris is he seems to be able to have a knack for getting his DBs to intercept passes and create turnovers. And turnovers is the thing on defense. If you can create turnovers, you tend to win games. We always hear about the turnover margin, and that is statistically plays out pretty well, that you win the turnover battle, you tend to win the game. But the problem is it's not a typically reliable way of playing the game, and it's generally better to be a stout defense that doesn't give up many yards and give up many points, rather than relying on having to get turnovers. So there's the up and down of that. It's you can generate a lot of turnovers, and we saw that with the Bears this year, where statistically they were kind of a middle of the pack defense, but because they generated so many turnovers, they kept giving their offense more possessions, and they were able to outscore and win a lot of games that way. So I think that would be the main number one appeal of a guy like Al Harris, is he seems to have that knack for generating turnovers.
I tell you, it's impossible for me to hear that a major selling point of Al Harris is turnovers and not think, well, that was the big selling point with the Commanders' previous defensive coordinator, Joe Witt Jr. Witt, during his time with the Green Bay Packers and Dallas Cowboys, presided over secondaries that were outstanding at generating interceptions, but that, for whatever reasons, did not translate to his time as Commanders' defensive coordinator.
Yep, for sure. And it is, statistically speaking, it's a very fluctuating stat. It's very rare that you have teams that are consistently high in turnover or interception rates year after year after year. It tends to go up and down, up and down. And as you say, Witt was one of those guys where it stayed high, like abnormally so, over a number of his teams. And Al Harris is kind of the same in that. So yeah, there is a point of, is that what it is? But, is it more that it was Al Harris helping create those things than Joe Witt, or is it the combination? Is it the personnel that they have? Like, we saw Sam was still able to generate interceptions, even though he didn't necessarily play that well. But the other guys, like Quan Martin, dropped a few and didn't play well, generally speaking. Trey Amos dropped a few, and they just, Lattimore was getting beat constantly on the other side, and whoever was in it at strong safety was rotating over and over and not really generating much opportunity. So some of it is personnel driven, obviously, and some of it is the coaching. The thing I noticed with the Bears defense was those guys are full of guys with ball skills. So like their cornerbacks great at driving on things underneath and tipping balls up and deflecting passes. The safety, Kevin Byard, had 7 interceptions, and some of them were just outstanding plays where he was, meant to be taken out of the read by a clear out route, and he anticipated that it was a dagger play where there was a dig coming in underneath, and he just jumped to that and intercepted that. He got Geno Smith on that twice in the same game, and somewhere he just showed off great range running from the center of the field to the sideline, making a play that most safeties can't make. So there was that, but there was the corners. One of them, what's his name, Wright, I think, made some amazing plays where he was behind, and there was a slightly off throw here and there, but he had great ball skills to recover and get back and intercept those passes. So those were things, and even the linebacker, Tremaine Edmonds, he had 2 amazing interceptions where the ball deflected off of a defender and kind of bounced up, and he made a diving catch where you would see like a receiver. If a receiver pulled that off, you'd be like, wow, that's an amazing catch. For a linebacker that's 6'3", 250 pounds to pull that off is amazing. So they had guys that with great ball skills, and we saw in Washington last year, outside of San Francisco, they didn't have that. Now, obviously, they're in year 2 of Dan Quinn, and they talk about wanting ball skills, and if they haven't been able to identify that trait and find that trait so far, would they be able to do that in year 3? I don't know. So there are definitely questions and concerns about that style of defense, and I think we've seen with the Bears this year that they were really good in the regular season, and especially taking advantage of bad quarterbacks. Like I said, 16 of those interceptions came against bad quarterbacks. But when you get to the playoffs, you're generally facing good quarterbacks, and they're not going to give you the gifts that they had this year. And they didn't get any of those interceptions in the playoffs. And they still managed to beat the Packers, but it was a last minute win where they were down for large parts of the games, and the Packers still scored 27 points. And they lost marginally to the Rams, but and they were a little bit tighter in that game. But that was also a unique game where it was almost a blizzard and a freezing cold game and not easy to pass the ball. So, there's mitigating factors to that high turnover rate, and you wonder whether that is a sustainable thing in the playoffs. If you get on a hot run, then yes, it can be, but it can also be a case like we saw last year in the playoffs for Washington. San Francisco had 2 interceptions against the Lions, and it basically turned the game for them. But if you get good quarterback play, you tend to not get those interceptions and turnovers quite so often, and it's tough to rely on that as a form of defense.
Much more with Mark Bullock in moments, but if you have a case, contact the NACE Law Group, Accident and Injury Lawyers. If you feel that you've been wronged, if you think that you've been wronged but aren't sure, contact the NACE Law Group, Accident and Injury Lawyers, and mention that Al Galdi sent you. You could call 202-902-7611. You could also visit Washington, D.C., injurylawyers.com, and submit for a free, no-obligation case review. The NACE Law Group features compassionate lawyers and zealous advocates for its clients, led by the great Chris Nace, and founded in 1979. The Nace Law Group is a Washington, D.C.-based family law firm that handles medical malpractice, personal injury, birth injury, legal malpractice, and consumer protection cases, offering aggressive advocacy for victims in Washington, D.C. and West Virginia. The Nace Law Group is outstanding. It will fight for you and your family. The Nace Law Group has recovered millions of dollars for the sick and injured. If you have a case, contact the NACE Law Group. Call 202-902-7611 or visit Washington, D.C., injurylawyers.com, and tell the NACE Law Group that Al Galdi sent you. The NACE Law Group, Accident and Injury Lawyers. We're discussing the Commanders' defensive coordinator candidates with Commanders analyst Mark Bullock of Bullock's Film Room, which you can find at markbullock.substack.com. Jonathan Gannon did some really good things as the Eagles' defensive coordinator over the 2021 and 2022 seasons. What do you think about him as a candidate to be Commanders' defensive coordinator?
Yeah, so he's a very different style of defensive coordinator. He's not trying. Well, every coordinator is trying to generate turnovers, but it's not his primary focus. His primary focus is being a very stout defense. He's very much of that Fangio mold, where it's going to be lots of quarters coverage, 2 deep safeties, the different types of quarters depending on, match coverages depending on if it's a 3x1 or a 2x2 set from the offense, and how you match those up with all the different kind of quarters checks that you have against those. It's going to be primarily a front four rush. You're not going to be blitzing a hell of a lot, so it's going to be very conservative and quarters coverage primarily. But it was incredibly effective with Philly. The question you have with Gannon is, he had elite defenses in Philly, but he also had elite talent in Philly. When he went to Arizona, the talent wasn't anywhere near the same, and the defense did drop off. So the question then becomes, is he a guy that, he can maximize elite talent, but a lot of people can maximize elite talent. How can he do with lesser talent? And he's going to have lesser talent here in Washington. So would that be, the style that's going to work for them? Possibly. Like, a lot of the guys they've interviewed are in or have at least some experience, if not most of their experience in quarters coverage kind of defenses. So it might be that they are looking to go in that way. But there's the question of would Gannon be able to coach up guys with lesser talent to become a very good defense, or does he need the elite talent that he had in Philly to really maintain that level of defense?
When it comes to Patrick Graham, Joe Cullen, and Denard Wilson, what strikes you as interesting about any of those guys, good or bad?
Yeah, Graham and Wilson both have interesting things to be like. Graham's been under a lot of good coaches and has experienced a lot of different styles of defense. So he came up under Bill Belichick in New England, where they did a lot of man coverage. They did a lot of, like, Belichick's whole thing was, we're going to take away your top option and we're going to make you win left-handed effectively. We're going to make you win without your best option. And so he learned a lot about how to use bracket coverage and take away top options and play a lot of man coverage with that. Then he spent time under Brian Flores. He was Brian Flores' defensive coordinator in Miami, where he learned a lot more about aggressive blitzing, not quite to the extent that Flores is doing now with Minnesota, but still, lining up in cover zero looks a lot and blitzing a lot and laying traps off of that. He's worked under Mike Pettin at the same time as Joe Witt and Jason Simmons. So he's been experienced the kind of quarters coverage, sim pressure stuff that they all kind of learned in Green Bay. So he's been under a lot of different systems with a lot of different influences, and he's one of the guys that every coach talks about. We want to build our defense to fit our players and our talent, but most guys will have their own identity and be like, well, we are going to fit our defense to our scheme to our talent, but our talent's going to be drafted to fit our scheme as well. Whereas he's one of the guys that, when he came into New York, he played a completely different style to when he went to the Raiders, where he had a completely different talent group, and he's changed up his style and been very different there. And he tends to maximize the guys that he has, and because he finds the fit for them. This last year, they fell off a little bit, the Raiders, but the feeling is that Pete Carroll came in and kind of said, well, I'm keeping you on, which it's pretty rare to see a defensive-minded head coach retain a defensive coordinator, but the belief is that he kind of thrust his own system upon Graham and said, you're going to stay on, but you're going to call my defense. And so that was probably where there was a bit of a disconnect. So I guess the part of the worry, if you were to hire Graham here, is obviously he's worked under Pete Carroll, so there is crossover with Dan Quinn, and it's a good thing that, he probably knows a lot of the same terminology, but would Dan Quinn be doing the same thing that Pete Carroll did, of being like, well, you're going to run my defense, or would he let him run his own defense? So Graham does intrigue me because he has such a wide variety of backgrounds that you think, well, the ideal thing you want from a coach is that he's going to find the right system that fits his players. But the flip side of that is, you can sometimes lose an identity if you're trying too much to be like, oh, well, we've got this corner that's really good at playing zone, and we've got this corner that's really good at playing man. Okay, well, we've kind of now got a mixed match of parts, and we'll just take all the good players, but we don't really know how to fit them together because we've got such a mismatch of parts, and then you have no identity. So I think that is somewhat of a risk. You also wonder how well he would do as, again, under Dan Quinn, whether he would be able to run his own defense or whether Quinn would kind of do what Carroll did, which was force his own defense on him. I'm not sure. I believe Quinn would let him run his own defense, but you never really know until he's in the building. So, yeah, Graham's the guy out of those that intrigues me the most because of his background and his variety. But I don't think it's the sexy hire. I don't think it's the one that people would be thrilled by. But I think it could be a pretty solid one if that's the path that they would go down.
Gonna be fascinating to see who the Commanders hire as defensive coordinator. Commanders analyst Mark Bullock of Bullock's Film Room, which you can find at markbullock.substack.com. Mark, thanks, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, of course, talk soon.
All right. Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It is a buildup of this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for rough days after drinking. Well, Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink produces an enzyme to break down this byproduct. Make Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best the next day. Enjoy drinks with friends. Enjoy drinks while watching the big game, and don't sacrifice your productivity for the next day. Start your night with Z-Biotics pre-alcohol and wake up ready to show up strong at work, clear-headed, focused, and back to business. Go to zbiotics.com/Galdi and you'll get 15% off your first order when you use the promo code Galdi at checkout. Plus, Z-Biotics pre-alcohol is backed by a 100% money-back guarantee, so there's no risk. Also, subscriptions are available for maximum consistency. That's zbiotics.com/Galdi. Use the promo code Galdi at checkout for 15% off. Washington Nationals managing principal owner Mark Lerner last July 6th announcing having fired Nats president of baseball operations and general manager Mike Rizzo and having fired manager Davey Martinez was an admission of something that I'd been saying for weeks. The Nats rebuild wasn't working. Well, what now has become clear is that the Nats are restarting the rebuild. The Nats on October 1st announced the hiring of Paul Taboni as president of baseball operations. The Nats in MLB's 2025-2026 offseason have done next to nothing in terms of significant player acquisitions. And the Nats on Thursday evening announced having traded starting pitcher MacKenzie Gore to the Texas Rangers for 5 prospects. What we had thought might happen this offseason, the Nats trading Gore now has happened. I wonder if shortstop C.J. Abrams will be next, and I endorse Paul Taboni having traded MacKenzie Gore. Now, if you are a Nats fan and you have rebuild fatigue, I get it. Trust me, I do. If you are livid at the state of the Nats, if you are furious over yet another Nats star leaving the team either via trade or free agency, I get where you're coming from. Trust me, I do. I do not one, but 2 podcasts on which I talk about the Nats, this podcast and the Nats Chat podcast. So trust me, I get the rebuild fatigue. Believe you me, I understand the rebuild fatigue. I have it myself. But it's not Paul Taboni's job to be concerned about rebuild fatigue. It's his job to conduct a rebuild that works. The Nats are broken. It's Taboni's job to fix them. And trading MacKenzie Gore is part of that fix. Not because Gore is some bad person, but because Gore is under team control through just the 2027 season, just 2 more seasons. Where he's at contractually is not in sync with where the Nats are at on the win curve, to say nothing of it being debatable whether he's worthy of a big money contract. And if you're not going to sign him, then you need to trade him. It's one extreme or the other. And so Paul Taboni, in what this offseason has been a seller's trade market in terms of pitching, has sold Gore, and for a nice haul. The 5 prospects who the Nats got were 5 of the Rangers' top 18 prospects per MLB Pipeline. Now, not a single one of the prospects is one of the top 100 prospects in baseball per MLB Pipeline. That is true. But you look at the 5 prospects. Shortstop Gavin Feen, the Rangers' number 2 overall prospect per MLB Pipeline. He was taken by the Rangers with the number 12 overall pick in the 2025 MLB first-year player draft out of a high school in California. Starting pitcher Alejandro Rosario, the Rangers' number 6 overall prospect per MLB Pipeline, and he a year ago was a top 100 prospect. He soon will undergo Tommy John surgery, but he was the number 50 overall prospect in baseball per MLB Pipeline going into the 2025 season. Infielder Devin Fitzgerald, the Rangers' number 12 overall prospect per MLB Pipeline. Outfielder Yeremy Cabrera, the Rangers' number 16 overall prospect per MLB Pipeline. And first baseman / outfielder Abimelech Ortiz, the Rangers' number 18 overall prospect per MLB Pipeline. Do I have any idea if any of these prospects will work out? No. Okay, these guys are prospects. Who knows? I do know that Gavin Feen, Alejandro Rosario, and Devin Fitzgerald are viewed as having major upside. But, there's a saying in baseball, prospects are suspects until proven otherwise. And that is the case here. I mean, we don't know if any of these 5 prospects will pan out. But if just 1 or 2 end up panning out the way that these guys could pan out, then this trade could end up being a big-time win for the Nats. The Nats got MacKenzie Gore in the Juan Soto mega trade. The Nats on August 2nd, 2022 MLB trade deadline day acquired MacKenzie Gore, 4 other prospects, and first baseman Luke Voigt from the San Diego Padres for outfielder Juan Soto and first baseman / outfielder Josh Bell. There, of course, is irony here that a prospect who the Nats got in a previous big-time trade of a star now ends up being traded in the latest trade by the Nats of a big-time star. I get it. Again, rebuild fatigue. MacKenzie Gore over 3 regular seasons with the Nats, 2023 through 2025, was durable. 89 starts and 462 and a third innings. He, over that workload, had a strikeouts per 9 innings of 10.06. That's good. More than a strikeout per inning for a starting pitcher is good. But he, over that workload, also had an ERA of 4.15, an ERA plus of 100, and a whip of 1.39. He overall was a league average pitcher. He at times was great, but he at times was bad. His highs were high, but his lows were low. And so he, for the Nats, ended up being a league average pitcher. Again, that ERA plus of 100. That's exactly league average. The truth is that the idea of MacKenzie Gore was grander than the reality of MacKenzie Gore. Now, that can change. There are plenty of very good starting pitchers who take multiple seasons to become very good starting pitchers. That may be what happens with MacKenzie Gore. That is part of the risk of the Nats making this trade. But it's important to understand what Gore was and was not for the Nats. The Nats, since winning the 2019 World Series, have had 6 consecutive losing regular seasons, 2020 through 2025. The team certainly does not appear to be poised to have a winning 2026 regular season, though stranger things have happened. But I tell you, I am as optimistic about the Nats as I've been in years. Paul Taboni has the Nats going in on analytics and sports science like never before. The Lerner Ownership Group appears to be spending real money on infrastructure, something that was long overdue. And Taboni, as we've seen via him trading MacKenzie Gore, is under no delusions of the Nats being better than they are. As time went on with Mike Rizzo, it became pretty clear that there was some delusion, maybe a lot of delusion, that the Nats were better than they actually were. With Paul Taboni, I think there is a fresh set of eyes, a sober set of eyes looking at this as it truly is. The Nats are broken. It is Paul Taboni's job to fix them, and he's in the process of doing just that. The Washington Wizards on Thursday night lost their 8th consecutive game, a 107-97 loss to the Denver Nuggets at Capital One Arena to fall to 10-33 in the NBA's 2025-2026 regular season. Third worst record in the NBA. But in a lot of ways, the most significant Wizards item from Thursday happened prior to the game, a press conference for Monumental Basketball president Michael Winger on Thursday evening, during which he addressed the state of our rebuilding and tanking Wizards. Michael Winger was named Monumental Basketball president on May 25th, 2023. He, on June 8th, 2023, announced the hirings of Will Dawkins as general manager and Travis Schlenk as senior vice president of player personnel, and announced the promotion of John Thompson III to senior vice president of Monumental Basketball. All of this constituted a major revamping of Wizards basketball operations, a much-needed revamping of Wizards basketball operations. So the team has been rebuilding and tanking ever since, but this season is viewed as possibly/probably the final season of the tank. The Wizards' first-round pick in the 2026 NBA draft reportedly is top 8 protected. They need to lose enough to keep that pick, but the belief is that they next season can truly try to win, especially because they are set to have a ton of salary cap space for next season. We, on Thursday evening, had this back and forth with Michael Winger.
Michael, David Aldridge with The Athletic. I know this coming draft is very important for the Wizards. However it goes is how it goes. But regardless of how it goes, are you pledging that the teardown is not only done, but we are now going to make significant additions to the roster besides bringing in Trey, given the incredible amount of cap space that you guys have, that you can bring in maybe multiple players, but at least one additional impact player this offseason?
If I'm understanding the question correctly, it's having added Trae Young, are we now in the marketplace of just continuing to add to pile on elite talent?
To add at least one more player, because he doesn't take up, still have a lot of cap space, even if you bring him in, even with his salary next season.
Yeah. I think the answer is I don't know. I think that we will remain opportunistic. I think that we will continue to evaluate the marketplace for what's available. We are not hitting a gas pedal of any sort, if that's sort of inferred in the question. We think acquiring a 4-time All-Star in his prime was sort of a hell of an acquisition for us. It has gas pedal implications, but we're not necessarily hitting the gas pedal. And so whatever we do with that cap space, it might evaporate in the next 2 weeks. We just don't know. But we'll do something creative with that cap space. It could be acquiring a player, it could be trading for a player, it could be re-signing some of our own players. We're working through all those scenarios right now.
Let's put it another way. Next season, should there be a jump? Should there be an expected jump in terms of the team's not only one-loss record, but ambition, getting back towards the playoffs, getting back towards being a contending team?
I am not personally setting some kind of a barometer on what next season ought to be. My expectation is that, particularly with Trae Young on the basketball team, and the development of our young players, Alex, Key, Bilal, Bub, Trae, et cetera, we are going to be better next season than we are this season. How much better remains to be seen. But I think that we all would expect us to be better and more competitive next season. And Trae by himself will put us in more competitive basketball games than we've been in.
So, Michael Winger, quote, "we're not necessarily hitting the gas pedal," end quote. But he also said, quote, "we are going to be better next season," end quote. It was interesting, though, that Winger was really careful with and conservative in how he talked about the Wizards regarding next season. I endorse what Winger is doing with the Wizards, but if what he's doing is working, then next season should be a step forward season for the Wizards. It will be very disappointing if next season isn't a step forward season for the Wizards. It will be very disappointing if next season doesn't mark the Wizards busting out of their rebuild. As for the Wizards' loss to the Nuggets at Capital One Arena on Thursday night, no joker. Nuggets superstar Nikola Jokic, the Joker, he did not play due to a left knee bone bruise, but the Wizards remained without multiple key players. Bilal Coulibaly did not play for a fourth consecutive game due to a lower back strain. Trae Young, for a seventh time in 7 games since being acquired by the Wizards via trade on January 9th, did not play due to a right knee sprain and a right quadriceps contusion. Marvin Bagley III was not available due to illness. Tristan Vukcevic was not available for a fourth consecutive game. He was listed as dealing with a left hamstring strain. He, for the first 2 games, was listed as being out due to left knee soreness. And Cam Whitmore is done for the season. The Wizards on January 15th announced that he had started the recovery process for a diagnosed venous condition and would miss the remainder of the season. The Wizards, in this loss to the Nuggets on Thursday night, overcame a 10-point first-quarter deficit, but in the second half never held a lead. The score in the fourth quarter was tied at 83, but the Wizards then lost the rest of the game at 24-14. The Wizards shot very poorly from the field, just 13 for 43 on threes, just 19 for 41 on twos. But 4 key young players for the Wizards, Alex Sarr, Keyshawn George, Bub Carrington, and Trey Johnson, combined for 67 of the Wizards' 97 points. Keyshawn George was the Wizards' leading scorer. He, in 34 minutes, 15 seconds as a starter, had 20 points, 12 rebounds, including 3 offensive boards, and 7 assists versus 3 turnovers. He did go just 2 for 6 on threes and just 4 for 11 on twos, but also went 6 for 6 on free throws. Trey Johnson, he in 34.05 as a starter, had 19 points, 3 rebounds, and 3 assists versus 2 turnovers. He went 3 for 7 on threes, 4 for 7 on twos, and 2 for 2 on free throws. Alex Sarr, he in 36.27 as a starter, had 15 points, 8 rebounds, and 4 assists versus no turnovers. He went 0 for 1 on threes, just 5 for 12 on twos, and 5 for 6 on free throws. And Bub Carrington, he in 38.06 as a starter, had 13 points, 3 steals, 2 blocks, 2 rebounds, and 2 assists. However, he went just 3 for 13 on threes, committed 5 turnovers, and had a game-worst plus-minus rating of -18. Also went 1 for 1 on twos and 2 for 2 on free throws. The Wizards this weekend have one game at the Charlotte Hornets Saturday at noon in a game that the NBA has moved up from 6 p.m. due to the anticipated winter storm. And that'll do it for you and me for now. Keep the feedback coming. You can hit me up on X at Al Galdi. You can email me the Al Galdi podcast at yahoo.com. Monday's show, episode 1246. We'll have a lot for you on the Washington Commanders. Also on Monday's show, discuss the Washington Capitals, the Washington Wizards, and college basketball. The Caps this weekend have games on back-to-back nights at the Calgary Flames Friday night at 9 and at the Edmonton Oilers Saturday night at 10. The Wizards this weekend have one game at the Charlotte Hornets Saturday at noon. And college basketball this weekend includes Maryland at number 10 Michigan State Saturday at noon. Georgetown at Providence Saturday afternoon at 12:30. Number 14 Virginia home to number 22 North Carolina Saturday at noon. And Virginia Tech at number 23 Louisville Saturday afternoon at 2:15. Have a great weekend. Hope we survive the snow. And I'll talk to you on Monday.
How about my mother, man, Cam Girl? Yeah!